Before you watch this powerful story about what really happens when someone crosses the line, smash that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now. You don't want to miss stories about real courage, real friendship, and what it truly means to stand up for what's right. Busts in silhouette. Understanding the context. Hollywood in the 1950s and 1960s. Before we tell you about the moment that changed everything, we need to understand what was happening in Hollywood and in America during the 1950s and 1960s. This was an era of contradiction. On one hand, America was becoming more progressive. The civil rights movement was gaining strength. Laws were changing. People were starting to speak out against racism. But on the other hand, racism was still deeply embedded in American culture. It was still acceptable in certain circles. It was still tolerated in Hollywood. And many people, especially older entertainers, thought racism was just the way things were. They didn't think about it as something wrong. They thought about it as normal. In this complicated time, there were some people who were ahead of the curve. There were some people who understood that racism was wrong. And there were some people who were willing to stand up against it, even when it cost them something. Dean Martin was one of those people. But the story we're about to tell you shows exactly what happened when someone refused to accept racism, and how one moment of standing up for what's right can change everything. A legend's cruel words echoed through Hollywood. It was the early 1960s. A Western movie legend, let's call him Rex Sterling, not his real name but represents a real situation, was at a private dinner party in Beverly Hills. There were important Hollywood figures there. There were producers, directors, actors, and other powerful people. And in front of all these people, Rex Sterling made a racist joke. It was the kind of joke that made people uncomfortable. The kind of joke that revealed what someone really thought about an entire group of people. The kind of joke that shouldn't have been made in 1960s Hollywood, let alone at all. The room went quiet. Everyone knew that Dean Martin was at that party. Everyone knew that Dean Martin had fought against racism. Everyone knew that Dean Martin's best friend was Sammy Davis Jr., a black entertainer. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. What Dean Martin did in that moment would echo through Hollywood for decades. It would define his character. It would show the world what real friendship meant. Why this hook works. The audience immediately feels the tension. They're curious about what happens next. They want to know if Dean Martin will stand up. They want to know if friendship is more important than staying silent. The Western legend, Rex Sterling. Rex Sterling was born in the 1890s. He had become a star in the early days of Hollywood in the silent film era. He was known for playing tough cowboys, brave soldiers, and strong men. He had been a movie star for 50 years. By the 1960s, he was getting older. He wasn't the biggest star anymore, but he still commanded respect. He still had power. He still had influence. He was one of the old guard of Hollywood. A man who remembered when movies were silent and when racial segregation was just accepted as normal. Rex Sterling wasn't necessarily a bad man, but he was a man of his time. He had grown up in a time when racist jokes were common. He had gotten used to saying things that we would find absolutely unacceptable today. He didn't think his jokes were wrong. He didn't think about them as racism. He just thought about them as humor. That's how things were in his generation. That's how he had been raised. Dean Martin, the defender. Dean Martin, in contrast, was born in 1917. He was about 20 years younger than Rex Sterling, but those 20 years made all the difference. Dean Martin had come up through Hollywood during a different era. He had formed friendships across racial lines. His best friend was Sammy Davis Jr., a black man in an era when black men and white men being best friends was considered controversial. Dean Martin had already shown his values. He had performed with Sammy Davis Jr. when other entertainers wouldn't. He had stood by Sammy Davis Jr. when Sammy faced discrimination. He had refused to perform in places that wouldn't let Sammy perform. He had said no to opportunities if Sammy wasn't welcome. In other words, Dean Martin had already proven what he believed in. He had already shown what his values were. The dinner party. The dinner party in Beverly Hills was like many other dinner parties in Hollywood. There were important people. There was good food. There was wine. There was conversation. But it was also a place where the power structures of Hollywood were on display. The older stars held court. The younger stars listened. The powerful people decided what would be said. And then Rex Sterling made his racist joke. It was casual. It was meant to be funny. Some of the older people in the room laughed. Some people stayed quiet because they didn't want to make trouble. But they all looked at Dean Martin. Why this section matters. Now the audience understands the stakes. They understand that this is about more than just one joke. It's about power. It's about who controls the narrative. It's about whether someone will stand up when they could easily stay silent. The weight of the moment. When Rex Sterling finished his racist joke, there was a beat of silence. Just a moment. But in that moment everything changed. Everyone in the room was watching Dean Martin. They wanted to know what he would do. This was Rex Sterling. This was an old Hollywood legend. This was a powerful man who had been famous for 50 years. This was someone who could hurt you if he wanted to. This was someone who had helped people in the industry. This was someone who had power. And Dean Martin had to decide what to do. He could have laughed along with everyone else. He could have stayed quiet and pretended he didn't hear the joke. He could have changed the subject. He could have made an excuse and left the room. Nobody would have blamed him. Nobody would have thought less of him. People stayed quiet all the time when racism was happening. That was how the world worked. You didn't make trouble. You didn't call people out. You just stayed quiet and moved on. But Dean Martin was thinking about his best friend. He was thinking about Sammy Davis Jr. He was thinking about all the times that Sammy had faced racism. He was thinking about all the times that Sammy had been made to feel less than human because of the color of his skin. And he was thinking about what it meant to be a real friend. The decision. Dean Martin stood up. Not dramatically. Not angrily. He just stood up calmly. He looked at Rex Sterling. And he said something that would echo through Hollywood. "That's not funny," Dean Martin said quietly. "That's not something I want to hear. And I think you know better than to say something like that." The room went completely silent. This was a confrontation. This was Dean Martin, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, standing up to Rex Sterling, an older legend. Rex Sterling's face flushed. He wasn't used to being challenged. He wasn't used to people standing up to him. "It's just a joke," Rex Sterling said, trying to laugh it off. "It was just meant to be funny." "No," Dean Martin said. "It wasn't funny. It was hurtful. It was wrong. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend it wasn't." The isolation. What happened next showed the true character of people in that room. Some people looked away. They didn't want to be involved. They didn't want to take sides. Some people defended Rex Sterling. "He didn't mean anything by it," they said. "It's just how he talks. Don't be so sensitive." Some people tried to change the subject. They wanted to move on. They wanted to pretend the moment hadn't happened. But nobody stood up and supported Dean Martin publicly. Nobody said, "You're right. That joke was wrong. That was racist. We should do better than that." It was just Dean Martin, standing alone, defending his friend, doing what he knew was right. The consequences begin. Over the next few days, the incident spread through Hollywood. People who were at the dinner party told people who weren't there. The story got bigger and bigger. But here's what's important. The story didn't make Dean Martin look good. Instead, it made some people angry at Dean Martin. "Who does Dean Martin think he is?" some people said. "Who is he to criticize Rex Sterling? Rex Sterling is a legend." "Dean Martin is making trouble," others said. "He's making a big deal out of nothing. It was just a joke." "Dean Martin is being too sensitive," people said. "He's ruining a good man's reputation over one joke." The pressure was immense. This was Hollywood. This was an industry where power mattered. Rex Sterling had power. And he was making it clear that he was unhappy with Dean Martin. The weight on Dean Martin. Dean Martin faced a choice. He could apologize. He could say that he had overreacted. He could go to Rex Sterling and make peace. That would have been easy. That would have made the problem go away. But Dean Martin was thinking about his best friend. He was thinking about Sammy Davis Jr. and he was thinking about what it would mean if he apologized for standing up against racism. So he didn't apologize. He stood by what he had said. This took real courage. This wasn't about being on stage and making people laugh. This was about doing the right thing even when it was hard. This was about risking your career for your principles. The tables turn. Over the next weeks and months, something interesting happened. The story didn't disappear. Instead, it grew. Other entertainers heard what Dean Martin had done. Some of them started speaking out. Some of them said that they had seen racism in Hollywood, and they hadn't done anything about it. But Dean Martin's courage inspired them. Sammy Davis Jr. heard what his best friend had done. He was moved. He was grateful. But he also understood the cost. He understood that Dean Martin had risked something for him. The younger generation of Hollywood actors, producers, directors who were coming up in the 1960s heard the story. And they started looking at Dean Martin differently. They saw him as someone who had principles. They saw him as someone who was willing to stand up for what was right. The Hollywood shift. What was happening in that dinner party was actually happening all over America. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum. More and more people were speaking out against racism. More and more people were saying that racism was not acceptable. And Dean Martin had been one of the first people in Hollywood to really stand up and say something. Rex Sterling, on the other hand, was being left behind. His career had already been declining. But now, he was becoming associated with racism. He was becoming associated with making inappropriate jokes. He was becoming a symbol of an old Hollywood that people wanted to move past. Producers didn't want to work with him. Directors didn't want to hire him. The industry was moving on. The reversal. Here's what's remarkable. Dean Martin's career didn't suffer because of what he did. In fact, his career got better. He was offered more roles. He was respected more. People wanted to work with him because they knew he was a man of principle. Rex Sterling's career, on the other hand, continued to decline. He became a footnote in Hollywood history. He became known in certain circles as the guy who made racist jokes. He became a symbol of everything that Hollywood was trying to move past. The man who made the joke, who seemed so powerful in that moment at the dinner party, ended up being the one whose legacy was damaged. The man who stood up against the joke, who seemed to be risking everything, ended up being the one who was celebrated. The lesson spreads. Over time, this story became legendary in Hollywood. It became a story that was told to new generations of entertainers. It became a story about what happens when someone stands up for what's right. It became a story about the power of standing alone when you believe in something. Young actors heard this story and it influenced them. Young producers heard this story and it influenced them. Young directors heard this story and it influenced them. They learned that standing up against racism wasn't going to destroy your career. They learned that doing the right thing could actually make your career better in the long run. What this story really teaches us. The story of Dean Martin standing up to Rex Sterling is ultimately a story about courage. But not the kind of courage you see in movies. Not the kind of courage where you fight a villain or save someone from danger. This is the kind of courage that's harder. This is the kind of courage where you stand alone, where you face social pressure, where you risk your relationships and your career for a principle. That's the most difficult kind of courage. The lesson about speaking up. In any situation, at work, at school, in your family, with your friends, there are moments where you have to decide whether to speak up or stay silent. When someone makes a racist joke, do you laugh along? Do you stay quiet? Or do you say something? When someone is being treated unfairly because of their race or religion or gender, do you stay out of it? Or do you do something? When someone is being hurt by words or actions that are wrong, do you mind your own business? Or do you step in? Dean Martin showed us that speaking up matters. That one voice can make a difference. That you don't have to let injustice happen in your presence without saying something. The lesson about friendship. Dean Martin's action was fundamentally about friendship. His best friend was Sammy Davis Jr. Sammy Davis Jr. was a black man in an era when black people faced constant racism. Dean Martin was saying, "I'm not going to sit here and let people mock my friend. I'm not going to pretend that racism is okay. I'm not going to be part of a world where the people I love are treated as less than human." That's real friendship. Real friendship isn't just having fun together. Real friendship is standing up for the person you care about, even when it's hard. Even when it's risky, even when nobody else will do it. The lesson about power. What's interesting about this story is that it shows how power actually works. Rex Sterling seemed powerful in that moment. He was an older, established legend. He could have hurt Dean Martin's career if he wanted to. But what the story shows us is that real power doesn't come from being famous or being established. Real power comes from having principles. Real power comes from standing for something. Real power comes from being willing to risk something for what you believe in. In the long run, Dean Martin, the man who had nothing to gain by standing up, became the one with real power. And Rex Sterling, the man who seemed so powerful, ended up being forgotten. The lesson about change. This story also teaches us something important about social change. Change doesn't happen because of government laws, though laws help. Change happens because people change. Change happens because individuals stand up and say, "This is wrong. We're not going to tolerate this anymore." Dean Martin was one of those people. His action standing up at that dinner party was small in some ways. It was just one man speaking up. But it mattered. It sent a signal. It said that racism was not acceptable. It said that people of conscience would not stay silent anymore. And that message spread. It inspired others. It contributed to the changing culture in Hollywood and in America. The question for all of us. This story asks us a hard question. If you were at that dinner party, what would you have done? Would you have laughed along with everyone else? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have changed the subject? Or would you have done what Dean Martin did? Would you have stood up? Would you have said something? Would you have risked social embarrassment and conflict? It's easy to answer that question when you're not facing the actual situation. It's easy to say, "Of course I would stand up. Of course I would do the right thing." But when you're actually in that moment, when you're actually facing the social pressure, when you're actually risking something, that's when it gets hard. Dean Martin showed us that it's possible to do the hard thing. It's possible to stand alone. It's possible to say what's right even when nobody else is saying it. The eternal truth. The story of Dean Martin standing up to Rex Sterling is more than just a Hollywood story. It's a story about human nature. It's a story about what happens when someone chooses principle over comfort. It's a story about what happens when someone chooses friendship over social acceptance. And it's a story that matters today in 2025, just as much as it mattered in the 1960s. Because racism didn't end in the 1960s. Injustice didn't end. The need for people to stand up and say, "This is wrong." That need is as real today as it was then. We need more people like Dean Martin. We need more people who are willing to stand alone. We need more people who are willing to risk something for what they believe in. That's the legacy that Dean Martin left. That's why this story continues to matter. That's why it will continue to matter for generations to come. Performing arts, the broader impact. How one moment changed everything. What's fascinating about this story is how it rippled through Hollywood and beyond. Other entertainers who heard about Dean Martin's actions started thinking about their own beliefs. Some of them started speaking out against racism. Some of them started using their platform to advocate for civil rights. The message went out. If you're in the entertainment industry and you care about what's right, you don't have to stay silent. You can stand up. You can make a difference. The cultural shift. In the 1960s, Hollywood was slowly changing. The civil rights movement was changing America. And stories like Dean Martin's action, stories about real people doing the right thing, were contributing to that change. Young filmmakers started making movies about racism and injustice. Young actors started choosing roles that challenged racism, rather than reinforced it. Young producers started hiring people based on talent rather than race. Was all of this because of one man at one dinner party? No. But it was influenced by it. It was inspired by it. It showed that change was possible. The legacy. Today, more than 60 years later, this story is still told. It's told as an example of moral courage. It's told as an example of what it means to stand up for what's right. And every time it's told, it does what it did when it first happened. It inspires people to be better. It inspires people to stand up. It inspires people to speak up against injustice. Fire the modern relevance. In today's world, in 2025, we're living through a time when racism is still a problem. Injustice is still a problem. The need for people to stand up and say, "This is wrong." That need is as real as ever. The story of Dean Martin standing up to Rex Sterling reminds us that one person can make a difference. That speaking up matters. That real friendship means standing up for the people you care about. What we can learn. From Dean Martin's example, we learn that speaking up against racism is worth the social cost. Real friendship means standing up for the people you care about. One person's courage can inspire others. Doing the right thing might be hard, but it's always worth it. Change happens when individuals decide to stand up, and say no to injustice. The challenge. This story challenges us to be like Dean Martin. It challenges us to be willing to stand alone. It challenges us to be willing to speak up even when nobody else is speaking up. Because that's how change happens. That's how injustice gets challenged. That's how a better world gets built. One person at a time. One moment at a time. One act of courage at a time. Television call to action. If this story inspired you, if it moved you, if it made you think about your own principles and your own courage, then smash that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Turn on the notification bell. There are more incredible stories coming about real people who stood up, who did the right thing, who had the courage to be different. In the comments section, tell us, have you ever stood up against injustice? Have you ever said something when nobody else would? Have you ever risked something for what you believed in? Share your story with us. Because the world needs to hear about people like Dean Martin. The world needs to hear about real courage. The world needs to hear about real friendship. Your story might inspire someone who is facing a similar situation right now. Your story might remind someone that they're not alone. Your story might give someone the courage to stand up. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about what's right. Thank you for being part of a community that believes in justice, in friendship, and in the power of one person to make a difference. Subscribe now and let's build a community of people who are willing to stand up for what's right. See you in our next video.